Now that we've covered the demand side of the market and the supply side of the market, we can put the two together on a graph to see how prices are established in the market system. So in other words, we have our price and quantity like so. We learned in our part 2 lecture that the demand curve is going to be downward sloping for any good or service. The supply curve will be upward sloping. And so it's the point where the two curves intersect on the graph that the market is now in equilibrium, and that's how prices are established. So let's say, for example, this was at a price of $5. And the quantity sold, let's say, was going to be 10 units. So again, the point at which the supply and the demand curves intersect represent equilibrium in the market. That is the only point where quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Remember that each point along these curves represents a different quantity demanded and a different quantity supplied. So of course, the point where they intersect, that would be the only point where the quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. If we set the price at any other point other than that equilibrium price, what it's going to do is put the market into what we call disequilibrium. So any other price besides $5 on this graph will create what we call disequilibrium. So let's see what occurs if we set the price higher than $5. If we set the price higher than $5, let's say we set it up here, and let's say that's $7. Well, so we look to see what is the quantity demanded versus the quantity supplied at a market price of $7. Notice that we intersect our demand curve way over here, which makes sense. We know that as the price of a good increases, the quantity demanded is going to fall according to the law of demand. So that's exactly what happened. We'll say at $7, people might only want to buy 5 units of that good or service. We don't like that higher price. However, notice that we intersect our supply curve way over here. We know according to the law of supply that as the price of the good increases, the firm wants to increase the quantity they supply in the market. So let's say the firms, they want to sell 15 units at a price of $7. So when the market price is set higher than the equilibrium price, it's going to create what we call a surplus. And so in this case, the surplus would be equivalent to the difference between how much is going to be purchased, which is $5, and how much the firms actually want to sell, which is 15. So the surplus would have a value of 10. And so in a free market, the way that a firm knows that they've set the price too high is that they start to see their inventories building up. In other words, they have that surplus of 10 units in their inventories, and so that signals to the firm that they need to lower their price in order to eliminate that surplus. So we would go back down to the equilibrium price. Now, the other thing that can happen is a firm can set the price too low. So I'll go ahead and draw our graph again. Let's say, again, we'll keep the equilibrium price at $5. Quantity demanded at 10. Let's say that the firm decides to set their price at $3 instead of $5. Well, again, we do the same thing. We go across and see where do we intersect our supply and demand curves. So here we have the opposite occurring. According to the law of supply, as the price of the good falls, the quantity supplied is going to decrease. So again, notice that we intersect our supply curve right here. So let's say firms only want to supply 5 units of the good or service at a low price of $3, whereas we intersect our demand curve way over here. In other words, consumers like the lower prices. We want to buy more, so we actually want to buy 15. So in this case, the opposite happens. The market is still in disequilibrium, but now instead of creating a surplus, we have a shortage in the market. And again, the shortage has a value of 10, the difference between what will be supplied, 5, and what will be demanded, 15. And the same thing's going to happen in the free market. In other words, firms are going to see that they constantly are not meeting the needs, that they're having these shortages in their inventories, so the market will rise, the price will rise back up to the equilibrium price in order to eliminate that shortage. So let's give a hypothetical example of something actually occurring in a particular market. Let's say that this is the supply and demand for red box rentals. And let's say currently the price of a red box rental is $2. And at $2, let's say the red box rents about 50 a day. All right, and then we have something that changes in the economy. Let's say that consumers prefer Netflix streaming service. All right, so this is what's occurred in the economy. We notice consumers prefer Netflix streaming service. The first thing we have to ask ourselves is, will this even impact the market for red box rentals? And we can draw the conclusion, yes. In other words, Netflix and red box are what we would call substitute goods. You can, do one or the other. So another thing that we have to identify is, okay, if it is going to impact the market, is it going to impact the supply side of the market or the demand side of the market? So we have to identify, is this a determinant of demand or a determinant of supply? So think of the 5 determinants of demand in relation to the 5 determinants of supply. What does this fall into? And we would say it absolutely is a determinant of demand. In other words, one of the determinants of demand was consumer preferences, right? Taste and preferences. So we see that consumer taste and preferences have changed in terms of how we like to view our videos. So now we identify that the only curve that's going to be shifting is going to be the demand curve, because the determinant of supply did not change. Now we ask ourselves, which way is that curve going to be shifting? In other words, is it going to shift to the right or is it going to shift to the left? And it depends on whether we think it's going to cause the demand for red box rentals to increase or decrease. Well, in this case, because consumers prefer Netflix now, we are going to assume that it is going to cause the demand for red box rentals to decline, which means our demand curve would actually shift to the left, like so. So we would have a new demand curve right here. So that would be our new equilibrium point right here. Let's say that's at 40. All right. Now, the thing is, the firm, the owner of the red box rental unit, does not know initially that consumers have had a change in their preference. What occurs is they will start to see a surplus build up in their inventory. So they're just charging $2 like they always have. And what they see is that instead of renting 50, notice that now at a price of $2, we intersect our demand curve over here. So this value right here becomes the surplus that builds up in their inventory. So let's say, for example, that they're intersecting the demand curve at 30. So again, they're only renting 30, but they're still producing 50. So they have this surplus of 20 that is building up in their inventory. And so because we know when you have a surplus, that means your price is too high, the firm is automatically going to start lowering the price down to the new equilibrium price. In other words, they will continue to lower the price until they've eliminated that surplus. So let's say hypothetically that would bring the price down here to like $1 a rental. And so once they've lowered the price down to $1, that's when we've eliminated the surplus and quantity demanded equals quantity supplied again. Now again, also notice that the equilibrium quantity and demanded has gone down. Supply and demand has gone down. Instead of renting 50 per week, it's gone down to 40 per week. So if this continues to occur, where the demand continues to decline, that's something that we call creative destruction, and we'll cover that in the next chapter. All right, so in the free market, what we can see is that the mechanisms of supply and demand will constantly be moving, and the surpluses and shortages will be eliminated because the firms will be adjusting their prices in order to eliminate those shortages and surpluses. But what happens if the government gets involved and doesn't allow the price to fall or rise to the equilibrium price? That would be an example of what we call a price ceiling or a price floor. So we'll cover a price floor first. And again, this is going to be a form of government intervention in the market economy. So let's say, for example, we're talking about the supply and demand for sugar. And let's say in the free market, the price of sugar is 10 cents a pound, and at 10 cents a pound, we sell 100 units. Well, let's say that U.S. sugar farmers, they can't make a profit off of 10 cents a pound. In other words, they would need to charge a higher price than what is set by the market. What they can do is lobby to the government to implement a price floor where the price cannot fall below a certain level. So if the government implements a price floor, it means it can't fall below a certain price. So let's say they set a price floor of 20 cents a pound. Well, we see what impact that's going to have on the market. In other words, quantity demanded is going to fall way over here. Consumers don't like that higher price, so we might only want to purchase 50 units of the good. Whereas the firms are now going to increase the quantity they supply of sugar because of the price floor, so they may want to supply 150. So it's going to create all of this excess sugar production. We'll end up having a surplus of 100 units, the difference between 50 and 150. Okay, so where does all that excess sugar go? Generally, the government is going to be the one to buy it up. Or in some cases, the government will just actually pay the farmers to just not produce the sugar. In other words, they know the overproduction is going to take place, and so they just give them the subsidies rather than having them produce the sugar and then have the sugar go to waste. So we want to understand, why does this occur? Well, we see the reason why the farmers want it to occur. In other words, the lobbyists are lobbying to the government because if they can't get the 20 cents per pound, they go out of business and they no longer can produce sugar. One argument for why this is a positive would be that if agricultural products were no longer produced in the United States because, U.S. farmers can't make a profit charging the equilibrium prices, that would make the United States dependent upon the rest of the world for our food supply. And is that something that we are comfortable with? So that would be an argument for price floors in a free market. But of course, the free market economist is going to argue against that and say, well, no, in a truly free market, those that have the comparative advantage should be the ones producing the good. Therefore, only the farmers that can actually make a profit off 10 cents a pound should be the ones producing the sugar. But either way, we see that when the government gets involved in the economy and implements a price floor, it's going to cause the market to go into disequilibrium, and there's going to be overproduction of that good, creating a surplus. The other thing that the government can do to manipulate a market outcome is implement what we call a price ceiling. A price ceiling is going to be the opposite. A price ceiling is going to be a situation where the government does not allow the price of a good to rise above a certain level. All right, so let's say that we're talking about something like rent for apartments. Let's say we're talking about a city like New York City. Well, in New York City, it's very expensive to rent an apartment. Let's say that the market creates an equilibrium rental price of about $3,000 per rental. And at that price, let's say that we would rent 3,000 apartments. Well, there are a large number of people that cannot afford $3,000 a month for an apartment rental. So what the government can do is come in and impose a price ceiling on a certain number of the rental apartments and say that the rent cannot rise above a certain level. So let's say they set that price at $1,500. So again, we see the same thing is going to occur. It's going to create disequilibrium in the market. At 1,500, we see that there's not going to be that many landlords that want to rent their apartments for that amount. So let's say only 1,500 will be available at $1,500 a month. However, let's say that a very large number of people are going to want to rent an apartment at 1,500, which again makes sense because, at a lower price, we know the quantity demanded is going to increase. So let's say we have 4,000 people that actually want to rent an apartment at 1,500. So this is going to create a shortage in the market, and the shortage would be the difference between the 1,500 and the 4,000. So in this case, the value of the shortage would be 2,500 apartments. So again, there's pros and cons to this also. A free market economist is going to argue against this and say, that you need to allow the free market to prevail. The market will set the price according to equilibrium, which would be right here at 3,000. And if there truly is a demand for low-cost housing, the private market will find a way to provide that good. In other words, where there's a way to make money, somebody will figure out a way to make it happen. Now, on the other side of the argument, there's going to be those that say, no, you don't want to wait for the private sector to solve this problem of low-cost housing. The government needs to step in and ensure that it's provided for those that can't afford the high cost. But either way, we see that a price ceiling is going to have the same effect on the market in terms of putting it in disequilibrium. It's just the opposite of a price floor. It's going to create a shortage. Now, one thing that I want to note is that the only way a price ceiling is going to be effective is if the price is actually set below the equilibrium price. In other words, if we were to set the price ceiling above the equilibrium price, it would actually have no impact on the market. The market price would end up falling back down to its equilibrium price.